Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are going to take a look at our first budget presentation for the 2023-24 fiscal year. Our agenda for this evening will include a recap of the 2021-22 fiscal year and how that dovetails into our current year. I will present the Act 1 index and the deadline for the school district if we decide to go above this index. On the right-hand column, I will review the current enrollment as well as our future forecast. I will also show our current assessed values and how they compare to last year's values. Next, we will review our debt service and our PSERS rate as well as tax rates around York County. And then last, I will have an update on our grants. Starting with our fiscal year 2021-22 review. Our audited 2020-2021 fiscal year started us off with a beginning fund balance of $6.4 million. Our revenues, which were budgeted at over $70 million, came in at $76.7 million. This increase is due largely to increased earned income taxes as well as higher than anticipated tax revenue collections. We also saw a higher number of budgeted tuition paying students in our special ed in-house classes. We also had increases to our basic and special ed funding. On our expense side, we were budgeted at $76.8 million and they came in at $78.3 million. This increase is due largely to higher prior year audited adjustments as well as charter school expenses and special education costs. The deficit between our revenues and expenditures was $1.6 million and came in lower than the budgeted $6 million deficit that we did budget for. So as we wrap up our audit for the 2021-2022 fiscal year and prepare the annual financial report, I wanted to explain what you will see on that report as well as in the audit. I have highlighted the areas that I will be discussing and how these numbers will be reported. As you know, we have received ESSER grants for funding to keep schools in operation from COVID, and we need to show those revenues received and expenditures spent in the fiscal year. Our actual revenue for fiscal year 2021-2022 includes ESSER funds received is $78.7 million in revenues, and actual expenses are $80.4 million. There isn't a change in our ending fund balance or our deficit because the $2 million received from ESSERs was actually spent in expenses. Moving on to our current year, we take our ending fund balance of $4.8 million and update it to our beginning fund balance for the 22-23 fiscal year. Shown here are the budgeted revenue and expenses on our updated ending fund balance with a negative $1,022,000. No changes to our deficit. We have our assigned fund balance shown below that will be used to cover the negative ending fund balance, which sits at $7.5 million. Some items of note under revenues, we have our level debt payment with our refinancing of approximately $500,000. We also saw an additional $1 million in basic ed funding that was not budgeted due to the timing of the state budget. As well as under expenses, we have our $350,000 budgetary reserve line item. Given these items, we feel confident that our deficit will be reduced by approximately $1.8 million. As we progress throughout the year, I will provide you updates on these. On September 30th, the official base index and enhanced index were released for Pennsylvania. The base rate is officially at 4.1% and Spring Grove's enhanced rate is at 5.5%. What this means is that Spring Grove's highest tax allowed tax rate increase without exceptions would be 5.5%. Last month, the school board approved the budget calendar and one of the key dates was January 23rd. This is the official date that Spring Grove must adopt a resolution not to exceed that 5.5%. We are recommending that we stay below that index, and we will also recommend that we prepare the index resolution to not exceed this. Later in the presentation, I will discuss our next steps for this resolution. Every year, we update the school board with current enrollment figures as well as enrollment projections that both PDE and Spring Grove calculate. While we both have different formulas to reach those projections, we have both come to the same conclusion that Spring Grove's enrollment numbers are decreasing. There are factors that can affect the accuracy, and one of them is a significant increase in new home buildings in our district. This is one of the reasons why we keep communication open with our townships and boroughs. We use information received from PDE as well as our local township officials to plan our future capacity in our buildings accordingly. What this data currently shows us today is that we do not anticipate additional physical plant needs or additional instructional staffing needs. Our next slide, we continue with assessment values. We did see an increase in assessment values this year with a 1.15% increase in assessment, and that's shown on the bottom right-hand side. Update on our LRTA projects that were approved. The numbers do include the Predex LRTA property, but these numbers do not include the North Point project, which is currently still under the construction phase. Moving on with our debt service, as mentioned earlier, we do use level debt budgeting, and 2 years ago we were able to also refinance our remaining debt. For the 2023-24 fiscal year, our debt payment is scheduled at $6.8 million. Our debt is currently approximately 8% of our budget, and the good news is as we continue to grind forward each year, we cut that number down. Our current PSERS rate is at 35.26% this year, and we will see an increase of 1.22% from this current year. That will be approximately $210,000 increase from our current year. This is approximately 14% of our budget, and in combination with the debt that I just showed you, we are looking at a little over 20% of our expenditure budget spoken for. I do like to point out the last column, which we have little control over. 13 years ago, our PSER payment was at 2% of our budget, and today we sit at nearly 14.5% of employer contribution rates to retirement. Our next two slides will concentrate on millage rate, and as you can see from this updated slide this year, shows that Dover Area School District passed Spring Grove with their increase. Our overall average millage rate for York County is shown on the bottom right at 24.0706 mills, and you can see the highlighted area of Spring Grove sitting there with an average of 24.0922 mills. Continuing with the millage rate, this chart shows the enhanced millage rate released from PDE and what Spring Grove actually increased. And as you can see, over the past 6 years, we have stayed below that index, with the past few years averaging at approximately 0.5% increase. And our last item for this evening is our update on our grants. And I wanted to take the opportunity to update the board with an overview of what grants have been allotted, what has been spent, and what is remaining. So on the left column shows the various grants that have been allotted to Spring Grove since March of 2020, and what has been spent and what is left to spend. The bottom two grants, which have been recently applied for and allotted, have not been released to the school district yet. According to PDE, these two grants should be released in the very near future. So moving forward for next month, we will have the final 2021-22 data from our auditors. We will also start to review the parameters that surround our 23-24 budget, as well as what factors influence that budget. We will continue our discussion on the Act 1 index, as well as prepare the Act 1 resolution not to exceed the enhanced index of our 5.5%. And finally, as we prepare our final budget transfers for our audit, we are recommending a transfer of $350,000 from the general fund to the capital reserve fund. We have traditionally recommended this transfer when we have not used our $350,000 budgetary reserve line item or our level debt payment. And in order to finalize the audit, we would ask the board to vote on this transfer at the October voting meeting. Our current balance in the capital reserve account sits at $1,025,000. We will also have two transfers listed on tonight's director study form totaling $650,000 from the general fund. So along with this transfer of $350,000 will bring our capital reserve fund to just over $2 million. We will use these funds for future capital projects that we discussed during the Capitol facility tour that we did 2 weeks ago. And this will end my recording for the 2023-24 budget. I'm sorry that I could not be there with you tonight, but I plan to be online to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.